Healthcare Organisation. I'm here with Kathy this morning for a presentation on becoming Motherwise, avoiding the cascade of intervention. Good morning, Kathy. How are you today?
Good morning. We are good. Ready to go.
Ready to go. Great. Okay. You all know Kathy, but I'm just going to read her little bio out here anyway. Kathy is a semi-retired Kiwi midwife specialising in natural labour and normal birth, resulting in impressive statistical outcomes. Kathy says it's not rocket science, it's just in-depth advanced prenatal childbirth education plus naturopathic partus preparatus. Preparing the mind emotionally and preparing the body holistically. It's about focusing on the natural to support the normal. So we all know that obstetric management can save lives, but C-section rates have never been so high and without a corresponding improvement in maternal fetal outcomes. So for women committed to doing everything in their power to give their baby the safest birth arrival, how can they prevent the often unavoidable, unnecessary interventions? So that's what Kathy's going to tell us about today. She's got a fabulous little presentation here. She's going to discuss the practical ways that women can help themselves to avoid the unnecessary medicalization of their labour and birth in order to avoid the unwarranted cascade of intervention resulting in traumatic instrumental deliveries and dramatic C-section deliveries. So Kathy, knowledge is power.
Yeah, isn't it what? So what I'll do is I'll share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint. I warn everybody now, it's a bit wordy, but that's okay. All right, and I'll just see if this all works. Okay, how's that?
Looking good.
All right, and we've got this kind of watery background. I'm not sure that I'd use that again, but hopefully it's not too distracting.
No.
So yeah, what cascade of intervention, and that's a term that is very well known by midwives around the world. But if you are a mum that's expecting a baby, particularly if it's for your first time or your second time, then that might not be something that you've heard of yet, but you will today. So just a little kind of quick overview of who am I. So yeah, semi-retired case-loading self-employed midwife. Around the world, sometimes you hear people term that as an independent midwife. We don't tend to have used that term so much in the country where I practice, which is New Zealand, because it sort of sounds like you are independent of the rest of the system, and that's not true. We just happen to be case loading, which means taking women on through the course of their journey. So that's their pregnancy, attending their labour, and then going to their then doing home visits. So that's case loading and self-employed, rather than being a hospital shift working midwife.
It's quite special for New Zealand, isn't it, Kathy, that you actually have those midwives that are very much integrated into the public system?
Yes, it is quite unique. A lot of countries around the world have what they call independent midwives.
Yeah, we have that here in Australia, but they're very much outside of the system.
Yes, whereas we are the system.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that is why New Zealand is one of the is regarded as having the best maternity healthcare system on the planet, because we are the only country that fulfills all of the World Health Organization recommendations for best maternity care, and one of that is case loading. So basically, in New Zealand, practically every woman has a midwife, and that's fundamental to her care, and we're nearly all 24/7 on call, caseloading self-employed midwives. Most of them are. And then if the woman requires attention from an obstetrician because her pregnancy or her labour or her birth are becoming complicated, so there's complex issues come in, that's when the obstetrician gets involved, because that's their specialty. A midwife's specialty is normal, and that means that we can well recognise when things are not normal, and the obstetrician's specialty is dealing with the complex issues when things are no longer normal. Yeah, so that's kind of my background in midwifery, and I've been New Zealand's #1 best-selling birth, baby, motherhood author since 2005, and I manage Motherwise.com with the free resources there for expectant mothers, and also very useful for maternity healthcare professionals. We can just go to kathyfray.com, it all leads to the same place. And then, of course, my work with Julie, who's co-hosting here today, and that is being the founding director for IMCO, which is the International Integrated Maternity Healthcare Organisation, who put on these free webinars. So we're sort of seen as global thought leaders on perinatal integrative medicine. So that's a lot of words, so let's just carry on. Yeah, so pizzas are delivered and strong women give birth. Now that is a famous saying from a famous New Zealand midwife, and it is, her name was John Donnelly, and real matriarch of midwifery in New Zealand, and I love it. It sums it up, because and becoming Motherwise is about preparing the mind emotionally and preparing the body holistically. It's about focusing on natural labour to support normal birth. So that's the default mode, and yeah, so we'll move more into that. All right, so I wanted to give you a little bit of statistics to begin with. I call this walking the walk rather than the talking the talk. So if we look back at my caseload, so my clients were about, this is when I was doing caseloading 24/7 on call for many years. So my clients were 50% immigrants. So that's 50% of them had English as their second language. 48% were primips, so that's first time births, which are always longer and more complicated statistically. 40% were AMA, or advanced maternal age, so somewhere between 35 and 45, and 40% had pre-existing medical conditions. Now, any midwife can tell you, looking at a caseload like that, that's not especially appealing statistically. You know, you could expect
some challenges there.
Yeah, you can expect some, fairly high intervention rates, surgical delivery rates, instrumental delivery rates, etc. with that. But let's see what the outcomes were. So for the average primip, her active labour, so we're not talking about latent labour, we're talking about active labour. And active labour is always when the woman is having 3 to 4 contractions. It's 3 to 4 contractions every 10 minutes, all over a minute long, that they can't talk through. That's the beginning of active labour, which is usually when a woman is around about sort of 4 centimetres dilatated or thereabouts. And her body switches over from latent labour into active labour. And that's the hard part, that's the real action part. So average primip, first time mothers to be, active labours were 3 to 4 hours. The multips, so having second and subsequent babies, active labour average was 1 to 2 hours. 40% of my clientele would be birthing in a birth centre or home birth. So that's what we call primary care settings. And then 60% would be birthing in a hospital, which we would be calling secondary care facilities. Less than 20% had epidurals, which was primarily for C-sections and really occasionally for an induction of labour. And about 85% of the labours were ending in vaginal births. And 90%, at 1 month after the baby's born, 90% of the women were fully or exclusively breastfeeding, and virtually no postnatal depression. And that will all make sense as we go along. So I think that we could sort of say that something was working, you know, to kind of take that challenging cohort and turn it into some pretty good results.
Yeah, they're wonderful outcomes.
Yeah, and you know, I sort of over the years I realized it's just not rocket science. I think that's the main thing. It's you know, I wasn't doing anything extraordinary, which we'll go through. Okay, so firstly, a very wordy slide. But I want to go through, this is where we're going to spend a bit of time, is this cascade of intervention, and why one thing leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. And if you are a healthcare professional watching this, this is going to, you know, put into concrete things that you already know and gut
Seen it
instinct
before.
anyway. Seen before, yeah. Or if you are an expectant mother, this might be a little bit medically, scientifically kind of taught, medical not so much science, but medical terminology. I think you'll get the gist. Okay, so the first thing that happens in that cascade of intervention is that an obstetric decision is made to interfere. So that's really that's the very first thing that's happened. Somewhere along the way, there is a decision that is made to interfere. And the big question mark at that point is the reason to interfere strongly indicated? You know, or is this a flippant, casual reason to interfere? So that interfering may be as simple as rupturing a woman's waters, or ARM, artificial rupture of membranes. And that is done to augment her labour along. So making it whatever is, maybe she's in latent labour and a decision is made to rupture her membranes to help to bring. You know, it's this, we've got a question right at the beginning. Why are we interfering? Because it has such huge implications. Other things that would be common things to be done as an interference would be to start some oxytocin drip, or prostin, as it's termed in some countries. So we're talking about an IV line in the woman, where we're drip feeding her body oxytocin hormone so that her womb will contract. And again, it can be used in an induction situation where the woman is not in labour, and we're using this to intentionally bring her into labour. Or it can be an augmentation situation where she's already contracting, but there's an opinion those contractions aren't long enough, strong enough, or frequent enough. So we start some oxytocin drips. And sorry, I called oxytocin. I just had a big stuff up there. I called oxytocin drip prostin. Rather, pitocin is the American word I was using for. Sorry, what am I saying? Yeah, pitocin. It's not a word that we use a lot. So no, prostin is a gel, generally, that we put that goes into the woman's vagina, which is part of prostaglandin gel, which is part of ripening a cervix, which is another thing that's used as part of this. Ask yourself, why is there interference, and is it strongly indicated? That's probably the main thing, is that it should be absolutely, categorically, without any medical doubt whatsoever, the right thing to be doing. with good, strong evidence backing that this is the right thing to be doing. It shouldn't be happening just because people are feeling impatient, or because it's culturally become the norm within that birth facility. Okay, so that's the first thing that happens, is that decision to interfere. Now, when we do, when there's prostin gel used to ripen the cervix for it to trigger for the waters to break, or we have artificially broken the waters, so we've started some IV oxytocin. The thing that comes along real quickly after all of that often is a pending need or recommendation for an epidural. And the reason it's complicated, but the woman is going, because she's getting augmented or induced into this labor, that baby is going to be needing continuous monitoring of a CTG belt around the woman's belly, because we've taken her labor from low risk to high risk by starting that intervention. So it takes you from the baby needing to have its heart rate checked intermittently to needing to have the baby having continuous heart monitoring, because we have much higher chances of what's happening leading to fetal distress. And when you've got a woman that needs those belts around her belly for hours upon hours, it can impact her ability to mobilize. They tend to sort of just lie back on the bed rather than being up and moving around, because when you're up and moving around, and you've got those transducer on your back into the fetal heart rate, often the woman moving around makes a loss of contact with it, and it just can become quite often problematic. And then because of oxytocin drips, the contractions themselves can be more fierce and can come on more suddenly, and it is more challenging for the woman to be able to physically, mentally, emotionally cope with what's going on, because it hasn't gradually built up as things traditionally would on a spontaneous, natural, uninterfered labor. Instead, we're forcing this on her body. So there is oftentimes a staff encouragement for the woman to get an epidural so that she can sit back comfortably, and that continuous monitoring can occur easily without there being a constant loss of contact of being able to hear the baby because she's moving around. And at the same time, it means
We might have lost.
the staff can turn that oxytocin drip up as high as is appropriate. Discomfort with the woman. So it's all saying yes, please. Can you hear me all right?
Can now. We've got a little message here saying that your bandwidth is low, and you did freeze for a little while.
Okay.
I think you're good now.
All right. We've had some bad weather up here, and we've had some internet issues in the last week or so. Okay, so where did you lose me?
We only lost you for a little bit.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we if the woman has had that prostaglandin gel to soften and ripen her cervix, the prostin, to encourage her body to spontaneously rupture its membranes, or her membranes have ruptured. Either way, if we haven't already got an oxytocin drip up, then often it will be. Now, if she has an epidural put on before if the oxytocin drip is gone, the epidurals will always, nearly always, reduce the contraction. So whatever is happening with the contractions pre-epidural, particularly if these are spontaneous natural contractions that are occurring, once the epidural goes on board, the frequency, the length, the strength of those contractions nearly always peters off. So even if you've got a woman who has not had any kind of induction or augmentation at the beginning of her labor or during her labor, as soon as she gets an epidural on board, she's going to need that oxytocin drip. So if we can get women to feel adequately educated so that they are empowered to not need an epidural, and they just know they can do it. Look, just like their great-grandmother, and maybe their grandmother, their great-grandmother, their great-great-grandmother, and all those women in their family before them who gave birth naturally and labored naturally. Like all of those women in their history, if they can get to the point where they go, well, of course I can do this. If all the women before me in my family practically did this, why can I not? Of course I can do this. So it's about getting yourself into that headspace antenatally. And I think that's probably, no, not I think, I know that would be, one of the most powerful reasons that my woman would have such fantastic statistics is because we focus so much during the pregnancy of getting their head into a headspace of realizing, of course they can do it. Why couldn't they? Of course they can. They can labor without an epidural, and there's loads of other things that we've got access to that can help. And she's got to have a shorter labor when she does anyway. So back to what's going on with this cascade of intervention. So the epidural has gone up, the contractions have gone down, and we need to be cranking up the oxytocin drip. Now, when an epidural, when you've got a woman who is having a reasonably good natural labor and you put an epidural on board and it forces the contractions to go blur, that whole process can easily take 1 or 2 hours from the time that you sort of request an epidural, it gets started, it becomes effective, then the contractions go down, then you start an oxytocin drip, then you have to keep it slightly more, turning up, until finally you get that woman back, or her womb back, into active labor again of 3 to 4 contractions every 10 minutes, all over a minute long, that she can't talk through. So we've got sort of quite often a couple of hours there that is kind of a waste. She's not effectively dilating, but the baby is still being exposed to some contractions, even though they're not doing a whole lot. So we've just now lengthened that baby's labor by a couple of hours.
And she's not really able to rest during that time either.
No, not at all. You're so right. There's a busyness going on. There's the anaesthetist is doing the epidural siting, and then you've got obs that have to be done after the dose has arrived, and then you've got the oxytocin. So no, this idea of sitting back and sleeping through a labor or resting through a labor on an epidural, that can't occur until they've got you into that labor, and even then it gets complicated. Anyway, so now that if you're looking at this little dot point list, so now we've got, so the epidural has reduced the contraction length, strength, and frequency. So the IV oxytocin has to go up to increase the contraction length, strength, and frequency. So now we've definitely got a high risk labor. We have and that's why we've got continuous monitoring. We've got oxytocin drip on, we've got epidural anesthesia, we have a high risk labor. And that's what is so many women don't realize. And they, when we've taken them away from a natural labor to an induced or augmented labor, it's high risk. High risk for her, high risk for the baby. And that's why she needs the continuous monitoring. And because of the epidural and because of the continuous monitoring, now we've impacted her ability to mobilize. She can't so easily. On top of that, she doesn't even have the inclination to often a lot of the time. When a woman is naturally in labor, the position that she's in all the time is leaning forward, leaning forward, leaning forward. Sometimes they might lie on their left side on the bed, have a bit of a rest, but this leaning forward dominates the positions that women are in. Pretty much, unless you were going to hang a laboring woman upside down by her feet, pretty much the next worst position that you can put a laboring woman is lying back. And what position are they in the epidural? They're lying back.
Always lying back.
Always lying back. And so now what's happened is that we don't have the same amount of fetal head pressure on that cervical ring. So you've got a ring of cervix and you've got a head that is impacting that and helping the cervix to dilate. It needs that pressure. But now, instead of the woman being upright, she's sideways. So we've got very little head pressure going onto that cervix, or certainly nothing at a normal amount. And also, because we don't have that head pressure, the baby's head on the cervix helping it to open, the baby doesn't have the same pressure it needs on its head to make it tilt its head down or flex. So we need the head on the cervix for the cervix to open, and we need that pressure for the baby's head to tilt and have good flexion, as we'd call it. And that flexion of their head is how the baby then descends in that pelvis. It's all so interrelated. So we've got reduced head application of the pressure on the cervix, and that reduces the ability for the woman's cervix to dilatate so quickly. It reduces the spontaneous need of the fetal rotation for the descent. So commonly in labor, babies lie with their back on the left side of the woman, occasionally the right, but normally the left. Lots of theories on why that is. But on that left side, it means that once, so it's common for the baby to be on the left side, or that sort of upper, almost the back at the top, but on the upper left side of that woman throughout the labor. And then once she's fully dilated, or dilated is the correct word, but once she's fully dilated and she's ready to start to push, naturally that baby does a small rotation to get its back lined up across the top of her tummy, and so it can then be born. But when you're lying back and you don't have that head pressure on the cervix, well, the baby doesn't have the inclination to flex its head, and the baby doesn't have the inclination to do that rotation, that quarter rotational turn. So now what we've got is a malpositioned baby. In fact, what happens is when a woman's lying back like this, gravity often takes over and the baby's back goes to the back. Why would it not? It's the heaviest part of the baby, because naturally she wants to be leaning forward, which brings the back to the front. But when she's lying back, the back falls to the back of her. And so now we've got a baby that's poorly flexed, that hasn't descended well into the pelvis. And when it's poorly flexed, there's a wider head circumference on the baby. So it gets basically obstructed. It calls it obstructed labor. The baby's failing to descend because it's not flexing, because its back's not around to the front. Yeah, so it's just one thing leads to another. And when now, so the failure to progress, which is the woman's cervix not dilating up to 10 centimeters. So that failure to progress is one of the commonest reasons once the epidural and oxytocin drip is on board, as to a woman needing to go for a C-section, because we don't have that head compression that's required. Or we can have obstructed labors. So the baby's head is not flexing properly, and it's high up, and its back it's a posterior labor rather than anterior labor. So all of these things culminate in the baby malpositioning, and then it becomes obstructed because the baby can't descend. So obstructed labors are the other very common reason why women end up having a C-section. Now, if the baby has reasonably well descended, and if that woman gets to fully dilated through her induced or augmented labor, then what happens? You go, oh, hallelujah, it's time to push. She's fully dilated. Let's get on with the second stage of childbirth. No, generally not. So with a natural labor, the woman cannot not push. She has an irresistible urge to push, and it takes over. It's amazing and beautiful and stunning to watch. But with the epidural on board, she doesn't have that same sensation, and she also doesn't have the same ability to push as effectively as a woman without an epidural. She can't feel it in the same way. So often what will happen is that once she gets fully dilated, the management of her epidural and her labor will say, well, look, rather than getting her to start to push now, let's give it another hour or two for that baby to descend further, so that when with these measurements that we use within that, and usually basically what we're talking about is traditionally, once she's fully dilated, the babies would be at 0 or at spines. That would be at the common descent level that it would be. So the plan will be, let's just wait till that woman is +1 before we start birthing. And +2 is when we start to see little peeps of a head. So rather than her going from 0 to +2 on her own, she goes from 0 to +1 with the epidural oxytocin drip, and then at +1 starts to actively push, because once she's at +1, that she may not need an assisted delivery, but that there's still a lot of assisted instrumental deliveries that occur, that's for sure. Okay, so problem is that we're now giving that baby another extra hour or two of labor, and we're not talking about mild labor, we're talking about ferocious labor at this point. These are super strong contractions that are going on. This is the peak. This is what naturally is called the transition or advanced active labor stage. It's super intense, and we're just, instead of that woman naturally having an irresistible urge to push, and who's starting to push, and the baby being born could be 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later. Instead of that, we're cranking up the Synto contractions and getting that baby to descend. While heck, our rates of fetal distress start to go up. So that's the other reason that women will start to need either emergency C-sections if that baby is not +1, or if they are +1, an instrumental delivery. Either way, we're yanking out, sucking out, or cutting out that baby because it's in distress. It's been in labor for so long, it can't handle it anymore, and it needs to have its delivery expedited. And yeah, so failure to, so we go back to the slide, so that failure to progress from the dilatation, from descent is not dilating the cervix, obstructed labours because we've got a malpositioned baby that's not flexed well, that's become posterior. We've got fetal distress from the ferocity of this augmented labour that's going on and on and on and on. And even then, when she does, if she gets to the point that it's time to push, the baby's +1, let's go for it. Well, again, it's the ferocity of those contractions are so huge. Yeah, so that's why we've got increased risks of instrumental deliveries, increased risks of surgical deliveries. Instrumental means the ventouse or forceps of sucking or yanking out a baby vaginally, and surgical deliveries are your C-sections, you're into theatre. Now, the outcome of that, substantially increased levels of birth trauma to both the mother and the baby. Massive, huge, 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 huge. So when a woman receives, particularly an emergency C-section, an emergency vaginal instrumental delivery, that's very traumatic for her family, and the trauma for the baby is dramatic as well, and that will lead to reduced birth satisfaction. Like, the woman is, it's just a lot to take on board emotionally, and will stay with a woman for her whole life.
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah.
It's
now
a big
that leads,
trauma.
The trauma, and it's all so preventable, most of it. Now that also leads to breastfeeding issues, because when a woman has had a traumatic arrival of her baby, particularly C-sections, often the milk becomes delayed, so by another day or two. So now we're getting to the point where the baby may have lost so much weight that we need to start topping it up with formula. That's not helpful for the baby. Well, I mean, it needs it, but it's not helpful in the big picture, and it's certainly not helpful for the woman emotionally and mentally, because she's not just failed in the labour and birth, she's failed in her exclusive fully breastfeeding plans. So both of her plans have gone to custard, and saying the word fail is really harsh, and but that is the feeling that women are left with. I don't think she's failed. I think the system failed her, and she was set up to fail, but she's left in that. That's the dominant word that comes through with women with their trauma. Is that things didn't go to their plan. Right? Yeah, all the time. And so now we've got lactation issues culminating as well. And so, of course, we've got increased risks of postnatal depression. You know, they sort of say it's 1 in 4. I think it's 1 in 3, and just not everybody gets seen or reported or statistically.
Yeah, not everybody's going to get picked up.
Yeah, not at all. And of course, reduced bonding. So you have to look at it and go, really, look, if she's had this traumatic a labour with this dramatic emergency delivery, because they're always regarded as an emergency delivery, and that's the reason, because we've got fetal distress, or we've got malposition, or we've obstructed labour. You know, we've got stuff that has to be dealt with. So it gets termed an emergency because it's not elective, pre-planned ahead of time. And you know, like, you put her through all that trauma, how is it possible that she's not going to have some depression?
Absolutely. Really? And then you combine the trauma with the fact that she's got to recover, well, looking after a baby around the clock and doing all of these new things that she's never done before. It's incredible that women come out of that first year without postnatal depression.
It is incredible. Those women that don't, like, how on earth did you go through all of that and not have some touch of depression in there? It's amazing. You know, when we look at it, a labour or a labour and birth is kind of equated to running a marathon from you know, a calorie count, sort of calorie usage point of view. So we've taken a woman who has just finished a marathon and then performed major abdominal surgery on her. C-sections may be common, but they are always a major abdominal surgery. So we've taken a woman who's just completed a marathon, performed major abdominal surgery on her, and then handed her a brand new baby and said, hey, look after this and feed this baby every 2 to 3 hours. When in life, in any other situation, would you take somebody straight from a marathon, give them major abdominal surgery for 24/7? Like, it's just insane. It is. It's crazy what we're doing. Okay, so cascade of normalcy. And this is what I can't encourage everyone enough to embrace. So how do we create a cascade of normalcy? Because just like the cascade of intervention, where intervention leads to intervention leads to intervention, it's exactly the same in the cascade of normalcy. The normal management leads to a normal result, leads to a normal result, leads to a normal result. So firstly, naturopathic pregnancy support. So promoting maternal wellness. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of women not just seeing their midwife for their normal cares and their obstetrician for their complex cares, but seeing a wellness expert through prior to their pregnancy and preconception health care, and during their pregnancy for prenatal health care. It's a no-brainer. Like every woman should be seeing a expert. It could be traditionally a medical herbalist, maternity acupuncturist, classical homeopath, all of the above.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done to help prepare for normal birth.
There's so much that can be done to help prepare the body for normal birth and to help keep that pregnancy normal in the first place, so that there is no discussions about needing to induce or augment, because it's been a healthy, normal pregnancy, not one that's gone on to have preeclamptic toxemia or preterm labor or gestational diabetes or growth restricted babies, you know, all these complications which are relatively common, and so much more preventable if that woman is being looked after, her pregnancy is being looked after with wellness support, and that cervical preparation, birth preparation, focusing on ripening and softening her cervix, so that when she does go into labor, it's soft and stretchy and ready to dilatate quickly. So all advanced deep dive prenatal education, and I can't emphasize that enough. And I've got some links at the end of this that people are welcome to refer to. But advanced deep dive prenatal education, like the woman needs to be, by the time she gets to around 34, 35 weeks, 33, 34 weeks pregnant, she should feel so empowered by understanding the stages of childbirth and understanding the phases of labor. She knows what's ahead of her. She feels confident with recognizing the signs of what's happening with her body. Her birth support people are feeling confident to support her. She's well thought out. She's got her TENS hired. She's got her birth preparatus herbs stacked up, ready to go from 35 weeks onwards in preparation. She's nailed it. She's ticked off all the boxes and she's got it all ready, and all that needs to occur over that kind of 3 months, really, from around 20 weeks to so 20, 21, 22 weeks through to around 32, 33, 34 weeks. Over that 3 months period, that's the focus, is getting herself really geared and psyched up and ready and excited about this labor that is going to be coming and giving birth to her baby. So when she's done those things, particularly the wellness seeing a wellness specialist through the pregnancy. She's got firstly lower levels of obstetric complications occurring. And she's got this way better, higher maternal confidence in her body to give birth. So then she spontaneously starts labour at term and will have 1 or 2 or 3 typically nights of overnights of latent labour. And this is where it's absolutely normal that women have several nights of latent labour that leads up to them going into active labour. And so when women sort of say, oh my God, I was in labour for, for 42 hours, well, you weren't in strong active labour, but yes, you will have been in latent labour for the overnights. Labour is a nocturnal activity. That's when the hormones become higher. So it's very normal. It's absolutely perfect. It's just as it should be that when you're at, over 37 weeks, that you will, at somewhere between 37 and 42 weeks, you will start to have these mild contractions overnight that will build up and get a little stronger, a little longer over several nights. And you sleep during the day. You live the life of a cat. Sleep during the day, have latent labour overnight. And allow that to be. That's all softening and ripening the cervix. It's shortening the cervix. It's starting to dilatate or open the cervix a little bit. And at some point, somewhere along that journey of 1 night, 2 nights, 3 nights, typically, then the woman things will change and her body will go into that strong active labour. So you want to have in fact, there's a golden rule. The longer that latent phase, the shorter the active phase. So you want many nights of latent labour, preferably, because that means that when you do go into active labour, oh my goodness, your cervix will be so soft, it's so stretchy, and your labour will be really quick and fantastic. And so now we've got that spontaneous commencement of labour, the rapid dilatation. We only need intermittent fetal heart rate auscultation or listening to the baby, because the baby, it's low risk, we're not interfering with anything. And she's supported by this plethora of different natural pain management things that we'll be using. So homeopathy, mobilization, her breathing, her massage, music, meditation, TENS machine, the transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, pads that you can put on your back, a dedicated birth support person, perhaps a little bit of nitrous oxide when she's going through that really peaky bit of advanced labour around that 8, 9, 10 centimetres, but the pull can be perfect for using at that advanced level of labour. So then she's got no oxytocin drip going on, so her body is managing her own labour perfectly, because that's the other thing, is when we have an oxytocin drip, we can't manage things as perfectly as the body does with oxytocin. So the body manages it to the needs of the baby. When a woman is spontaneously in labour, we're not interfering. It is so incredibly rare that a white baby has fetal distress. It's just hardly ever happens, and if it does, it will be gradually occurring. So you'll just see that the baby's heart rate over the course of an hour or something may sort of start to increase. The baby's basically showing signs that it's starting to get a little bit tired. But the idea of the baby going into sudden or rapid fetal distress when a woman is spontaneously in natural labour, it's just almost never happens. But we still will auscultate and listen to the baby anyway to make sure. But it's just incredibly rare to see fetal distress on a spontaneous natural labour that's not interfered with. So she'll get this incredibly strong desire to push in that second stage. And people think that pushing the baby out is the most painful part of labour. It's not. The worst part of childbirth really is that last sort of 1 to 2 centimetres of dilating. Once the cervix is fully dilated and a woman starts to push, that's the thing. So with and when we do sometimes have maternal exhaustion, where the woman is just, she has been out for 3 nights, she's just, she is getting kind of shattered. 90% of the time, if we just give her a litre of fluids quite rapidly into her body, hey presto, she feels better, the baby feels better, and the labour carries on. And that's usually because although you're sipping on a lot of water when you're in labour, you do get to the point where your body's just not even digesting it, and it's kind of all just sitting in your stomach, because your body is in labour, it's not focusing on digesting. So sometimes just giving a woman a litre of fluids, oh my god, hey presto, or a bit of homeopathy drops, and bing bang, she's back on track and recovering very, very well. So we've got much lower levels of birth trauma, because what's going on? I mean, she may have a small tear, but she's had a natural, lovely, beautiful labour with a gorgeous birth, perhaps a water birth, so there's very little trauma, if anything, for her and the baby. Birth satisfaction off the charts. She's ecstatic. The partner's ecstatic. The family's ecstatic. The joy in the room is extraordinary. It's miraculous. It's beautiful. There is a bubble of joy that occurs after pregnancy, which is occurs after birth, which is absolutely unique to birth. It is the most amazing vibration in the air. It just electric, incredible. Breastfeeding rate, fantastic. The baby has not been traumatized by its ventouse delivery, its forceps delivery. It does not have a headache. It's, in fact, I've seen babies who practically, honestly, look like they would purr if they could purr. They're just so happy to be born, and they just look amazing. So the bonding is up, and there's virtually no postnatal depression, virtually none. So that's that cascade of normalcy. So I'm going to run through, we're almost running out of time here, and I'm going to run through some last little bits. I want to show you, the final thing that I want to show you is some very interesting research. Now, this was a retrospective study that was done in Auckland, New Zealand, and it was done in an area called Counties Manukau, which is known as South Auckland, and that is an area where there is one major, huge, large hospital. In fact, it's the busiest, has the busiest birthing suite in Australasia, a big major tertiary hospital, and there are 3 primary care birth facilities in the community. So what was done with the study is they looked at over 4,000 women who were healthy, normal, low-risk women going into spontaneous labour. And what were the differences of the outcomes of whether they were birthing in the primary care setting or whether they were birthing in the secondary care setting? Birth centre versus major hospital. And this is New Zealand, and our stats are good in comparison to many countries. So this was a pretty shocking result. So the mothers were 4 times less likely to have an emergency C-section if they were in a birth centre. The mothers were 1.5 times less likely to hemorrhage. They were 5 times less likely to be admitted into the high dependency intensive care or operating theatre areas. The babies were 3 times less likely to have low APGAR scores, and the babies were half as likely to need admission to a neonatal unit. Like, far out.
So significant.
Mind-boggling stats. Okay, so that is really the conclusion. So this was obviously just a really little overview today, and if we want average childbirth outcomes, let's have average childbirth education. 1 + 1 = 2. So what if you go onto kathyfray.com, there is a free download available there called the Organic Birth Guide, and anybody can download that free. That's really written as designed for a reference for birth support people. And then organic, there's also links on my site to my 90-minute organic birth video, which goes into a lot more detail. And there's also information there about my Motherwise masterclasses. So there's basically what I'm saying is I'm not trying to advertise you. I'm just saying there's resources, there's stuff available.
They
so,
are fantastic resources.
Thank you.
Really helpful, really easy to use, and just really good resources. Get on it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of years gone into them. Yeah. So look, they're available. So if you are a mum expecting, go to those resources. If you are a healthcare professional, who is dealing with pregnant and expecting mums, encourage them to go to these resources. They're there for everybody because we want to change outcomes. And so there's the so to say, you can go kathyfray.com or motherswise.com. Either way, it just leads you to the same place. And yeah, so that is that. That's what we're talking about. Fantastic. Is becoming Motherwise.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was a wonderful presentation full of great information, great nuggets of wisdom as usual. And
thank you, and thank you for hosting today. And I know I must let Julie go because she needs to get her son to school.
I've got to do the school run now.
And but thanks everybody who was here live, and very much appreciated. And do we receive a copy of the slides or the replay? Yeah, there will be a link sent in the next 24 hours of the video, so that'll automatically go to you guys. And yeah, so thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Julie.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week. Bye, everybody.
See you next week. Bye.